That Halloween night, everything seemed normal. Kids were running through the streets collecting candy, and adults watched from a distance, holding cups of coffee or wine. My house was one of the few I decorated. Nothing too extravagant, just a carved pumpkin and a fake spider web on the gate. I wasn't expecting many visitors since I lived on a quiet street, but I wanted to participate in the festivities, even if just a little. Around 7 in the evening, I heard the first knocks on the door. It was a group of children in elaborate costumes. A witch, a skeleton, and a vampire. Trick or treat, they shouted in unison. I smiled and handed out candies to each of them. They thanked me and ran off to the next house. The night had just begun, and I settled into the sofa with a hot cup of tea, expecting a calm evening. But about 10 minutes later, I heard the same knocks on the door. When I opened it, there they were again, the same 3 kids. The same costumes, the same smiling faces. Trick or treat, they repeated with the same energy as before. I found it odd, but figured they were just repeating their route. I laughed awkwardly and handed out more candy, believing they'd move on soon. They ran off again, and I went back inside. However, not 5 minutes passed before the knocks returned. This time, my smile faded. When I opened the door, there they were again. The witch, the skeleton, and the vampire. Each one holding the same candy bags, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. The déjà vu was overwhelming. It was as if time had stopped, and everything was repeating itself exactly the same way. A chill ran down my spine, but I still gave them more candy, trying not to seem rude. The kids thanked me, just like before, and ran toward the sidewalk. I closed the door slowly, wondering what was going on. I decided to watch through the window to see where they'd go. But to my surprise, they didn't visit any other houses. They just stood in front of mine, motionless, as if waiting for something. My heart started to race. Something wasn't right. I decided to ignore it and return to the couch, trying to focus on a TV show. But before I could concentrate, the knocks came again. Louder this time, more insistent. I got up with a knot in my stomach. When I opened the door, they were there once more. The same children, the same costumes, but now their faces looked different. Pale, expressionless, as if they were tired of smiling. Their eyes were darker, almost hollow. Trick or treat, they said in unison again, but now their voices sounded mechanical, as if all the joy had been drained from them. My mind screamed that something was terribly wrong. I tried asking who they were, where they came from, but they didn't respond. They just extended their hands, waiting for more candy. With trembling fingers, I dropped more sweets into their bags and slammed the door shut. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. This time, I locked the door and turned off all the lights in the house. Maybe, I thought, if they think I'm not home anymore, they'll leave. But the knocking returned, each time louder, each time more violent, as if something was desperate to get in. I covered my ears, trying not to lose my mind, but the knocking echoed inside my head, relentless, like a countdown. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I flung the door open, ready to scream or run, but the children were gone. In their place were 3 different figures, the same costumes, witch, skeleton, and vampire. But now their bodies were twisted and deformed, as if they had been stretched beyond human limits. Their faces were waxy pale, and their eyes were 2 black voids that swallowed all the light around them. They didn't speak this time. They just extended their hands, waiting for something more than candy, something I knew I couldn't give. Panic surged through me, but before I could shut the door, I felt a cold hand touch my arm. A deep chill flooded my body, and everything around me began to dissolve, as if the world was crumbling apart. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of children's laughter echoing in the distance, like a nightmare that never ends. When I woke up, I was sitting on the couch, exactly where I had been before. The house was silent, and there was no sign of the children or the knocking at the door. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, until I looked at the table beside me and saw the candy bags I had given to the children. They were full, and inside them were small pieces of paper, each with a name written on it. Mine was the first. Before we dive into the next story, why not subscribe to make sure you never miss a future mystery? If you're enjoying it, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I was never one to get excited about Halloween, but that year I decided to change. The entire town seemed immersed in the holiday spirit, and I thought, why not join in? I spent the whole week searching for a costume that was different and special, until I stumbled upon a hidden thrift store at the end of a narrow street. The storefront didn't stand out, but inside, something immediately captivated me. A long black dress, simple yet incredibly elegant, with subtle embroidery that seemed to form ancient symbols. There was something about it that screamed authenticity, as if it carried an old, forgotten story. The store owner, an old man with a vacant look, warned me in an almost indifferent voice. This dress belonged to someone who treated it like an extension of herself. Just don't let it change you. I thought it was just a cheap attempt to create mystery and ignored the warning. I paid for the dress and took it home. On Halloween night, I put the costume on and looked at myself in the mirror. I was surprised by how perfectly the dress fit my body, as if it had been tailored for me. The fabric was soft, yet heavy, as if each thread carried an ancient secret. Something about it made me feel powerful, confident in a way I had never experienced before. The dress came with a few accessories, a necklace with a small moon-shaped pendant and a pointed hat. I completed the look and headed to a friend's party, feeling different. It wasn't just my appearance. It was something deeper, a feeling of control, as if every move I made was accompanied by an invisible aura. As soon as I arrived at the party, I noticed that all eyes turned toward me. The compliments were constant. What an incredible costume! Where did you get that? But there was something unsettling in their gazes. It wasn't just admiration. There was a hint of fear, as if something about my appearance caused discomfort. Still, I carried on with the night, enjoying the attention. Gradually, I began to realize that the dress seemed to have a will of its own. It wasn't obvious, but in certain moments, my arms moved with exaggerated grace, as if an external force was guiding my gestures. During a dance, I found myself performing steps I had never learned, and the feeling of absolute control was almost intoxicating. At first, I found it fascinating, as if the dress was awakening something that had always been dormant inside me. As the party went on, things started to spiral out of control. At one point, I approached a group of friends and began speaking in a language I didn't know. Strange words flowed from my mouth without me understanding them, and the atmosphere around me grew heavier, as if the entire party had slowed down. I remember the frightened looks on people's faces, but I couldn't stop. The words came effortlessly, like an ancient prayer that needed to be completed. Then I felt the first shock. The necklace I was wearing began to heat up against my neck, burning my skin. I tried to pull it off, but my fingers wouldn't obey. The dress seemed to tighten more and more, molding itself to my body like a second skin. The feeling of power that had been exhilarating was now suffocating. I wasn't in control of the costume, it was controlling me. I ran to the bathroom, desperate to remove the dress, but it felt glued to my body. I tried pulling it off, tearing it, but the fabric regenerated instantly, as if it were made of something alive. My reflection in the mirror was no longer mine. My eyes, once clear, were now dark as night, and my face seemed to belong to someone else. Someone who had worn that dress long before me. The voice began soon after. It was soft, whispering in an unknown language, but I knew it was telling me to complete something. I felt like I was on the verge of finishing a ritual that had been interrupted in the past, and now I was the final piece. My hands moved on their own, drawing symbols in the air, while the necklace around my neck glowed intensely, emitting a cold, oppressive light. I fought against the force that was taking over me, but it was useless. Each attempt to resist brought more pain, as if the dress itself was punishing my disobedience. That's when I understood. I wasn't the first to wear it, and all the others before me had lost the fight. The memories weren't mine, but they began to flood my mind. I saw women from different eras wearing the same garment, each one being consumed little by little until they disappeared completely. The dress wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a channel, a passage for something that needed to manifest in this world. With tears in my eyes, I tried to tear off the necklace once more, but it seemed to melt into my skin, fusing with me. The voice in my head grew louder, demanding that I complete the ritual. I looked in the mirror one last time and saw something terrifying. My reflection was smiling, even though my real face was panicked. It wasn't me anymore. Desperate, I left the bathroom and tried to ask for help, but no one at the party seemed to recognize me. I screamed, cried, but it was as if I no longer existed to them. Finally, I realized that I was alone in this fight, and time was running out. I ran outside, hoping the cold, silent street would break the costume's influence. But as soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I felt my body freeze. The dress tightened around me like a prison, and my legs stopped moving. The last thing I remember is falling to my knees, as the voice inside me finally took complete control. When I woke up, I was back at the thrift store. The store owner watched me with a vacant and resigned look, as if he knew what had happened. Without a word, he reached out and removed the necklace from my neck. The moment it was gone, I felt my consciousness return, as if I had emerged from a deep nightmare. "She always finds someone," he said with a tired sigh, placing the necklace back on the shelf. I left the store in silence, knowing that something in me had changed forever. Since that night, I can't look in the mirror without seeing the reflection of someone else. And every now and then, I still feel the weight of the dress around my body, even though it's no longer there. The house on the hill was a sort of urban legend in our town. Everyone had a different story about it. Ancient murders, occult rituals, even mysterious disappearances. Though these were just rumors, one thing was certain. Anyone who entered that house on Halloween night never came out the same. Some went mad, others never spoke about what they saw. But, like any group of teenage friends, we thought it would be a brilliant idea to spend Halloween there. Me, Rafa, and Carol had known each other forever, and we loved testing our limits when it came to exploring strange places. But something felt different about that night. The wind was cold, and the sky seemed darker than usual, as if a storm was brewing beyond the clouds. We climbed the hill with flashlights in hand and backpacks slung over our shoulders, trying to mask our fear with forced jokes. The house stood tall at the top, imposing and decaying, as though it had watched time pass without being touched. The windows were broken, the door ajar, and the garden overgrown with weeds and dried branches that intertwined like skeletal fingers. As soon as we set foot on the porch, the wind abruptly stopped, plunging everything into an unsettling silence. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. We cautiously stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet. The air inside was heavy, filled with the scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic, like rust or dried blood. The living room looked just like the old photos we had seen online. Dusty furniture, a large mirror on the wall, and a broken chandelier hanging from the ceiling. For a moment, it felt like just another abandoned building, but then Rafa pointed to the floor. There were footprints in the dust, too fresh to be old. We decided to explore the house, each of us taking a different room. I headed to the kitchen, where dirty dishes were still piled in the sink, as if someone had left in the middle of a meal. The fridge was open but completely empty, except for a single glass jar filled with a dark liquid. The moment I touched it, a shiver ran down my spine, and the jar's lid twisted off on its own, releasing a horrible stench. I dropped it and ran back to the living room. Carol was in the library, looking at books that didn't belong there. They were old, with thick covers and filled with symbols we couldn't understand. She said it seemed like someone had purposely left them open, as if they wanted us to read something. Rafa, on the other hand, had gone upstairs. He called us to see something bizarre. A wall covered in portraits. They were old family photos, but something was off. Every face in the photos had been scratched out except for one. A pale woman with a disturbing smile, who seemed to follow us with her eyes no matter where we stood. While we were examining the portraits, we heard a creak beneath our feet. The floor began to tremble slightly, and that's when we realized the front door had closed on its own. We ran to it, but it was locked. We tried to break it down, but it was as if the wood had turned to stone. Panic began to rise in us, and that's when we noticed something terrifying. The house was changing. The walls, once faded, now looked fresh, as if they had been painted recently. The mirror in the living room, which had been dusty, now gleamed with perfection, reflecting something that wasn't our reflection. Instead of us, we saw three other people. Two men and a woman, all dressed in clothes from another era, staring at us with pure terror in their eyes. We tried to escape through the window, but the glass was unbreakable. Time seemed to distort around us. Minutes stretched into hours, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. That's when we heard footsteps. Slowly, something was climbing the stairs, drawing closer to the second floor. We couldn't see it, but we could clearly hear the sound of feet dragging across the wooden floor, heading straight toward us. Carol was the first to lose it. She started screaming, saying she had to get out of there no matter what. She ran down the hallway toward a door that hadn't been there before. As soon as she crossed through it, her scream was cut off abruptly. When Rafa tried to follow her, the door vanished before our eyes, leaving only a cold, smooth wall. Now it was just me and Rafa, trapped in that nightmare with no way out. Whatever was climbing the stairs was getting closer, and the air around us felt denser, as if something invisible was pressing down on us. We tried to hide in the library, but as soon as we entered, the bookshelves began to move on their own, closing in around us like walls. Rafa held my hand, telling me we needed to stay calm, but I knew it was too late. The last thing I remember was the sound of the bedroom door opening slowly and a cold presence filling the room. My body froze, and my eyes began to close on their own, as if being forced by a power beyond comprehension. When I woke up, I was on the hill, alone. The house was gone. The sky was clear, as if there had never been a storm. I searched for Carol and Rafa, but they were never found. To this day, no one believes my story. They say the house never existed, that it was just a hallucination. But every night, in my dreams, I see it clearly, and I hear the footsteps climbing the stairs, getting closer every time.